and had an asteroid named in his honor. Most importantly, he is a proud member of Temple Judea. It is my privilege to present today's speaker, Bill Prady.
Thank you so much. That was quite lovely. Thank you. I'm really, when we talked about what this talk might be about, and we settled on jokes. I realized how incredibly happy I was to be talking about jokes because I love them, and it's just an amazing, concise, wonderful kind of writing and kind of storytelling and kind of performing that I'm a fan of forever. Here is and specifically to answer the question, or to try to answer the question, what makes a joke Jewish? I will read you something that I am told is translated from the Polish. It says, "They say when you tell a joke to a peasant, he laughs 3 times. Once when you tell the joke, again when you explain it, and yet again when he understands it, because peasants love to laugh. When you tell a joke to a landowner, he laughs twice. Once when you tell him the joke, and again when you explain it, because he never really understands it. When you tell a joke to an army officer, he laughs once. When you tell it, he never lets you explain it, and it goes without saying that he's unable to understand it. But when you tell a joke to a Jew, even before you've had a chance to finish it, he's already interrupting you. First, he's heard it before. Second, why are you telling it wrong? So he decides to tell you the joke in a much better version than yours."
Very funny.
My exposure to jokes, to old-fashioned jokes, to a rabbi walks into a bar kind of jokes, started at funerals, at Shiva. It was a strange, wonderful thing that would happen. Day 1 of Shiva was sad, and day 2 of Shiva was sad. But day 3, my dad and my uncles and my grandpa when he was alive, they would start to gather, maybe in the kitchen, maybe off to the side somewhere, and they'd start to tell jokes. And I would stand there and I would listen, and I would try to memorize these jokes. I would try to hold them in my head. There was something about this sort of glimpse of this other world, of this humor. And I fell in love with jokes. Jokes, by the way, are no longer the predominant thing that happens if you go to see a comedian. If you went to see a comedian in the Borscht Belt in the 50s, they would stand up and they would tell jokes. They'd tell you about Murray in the Garment District and this fellow and his mother, and they would tell jokes. At some point that changed, and we've talked about in other talks, we've talked about the history of the evolution of Jewish comedy. It's an interesting point when it changed. It changes with a comedian named Alan King, who you'll all remember, most of you will remember, and Alan King started talking about his own life. And that changed stand-up comedy from telling jokes to the observational comedy that's Jerry Seinfeld today. But I miss this wonderful form. Story joke is the name of this joke. And it's really interesting thing, as a screenwriter, as somebody who writes television and movie scripts, when we write a movie script, we work in what's called a 3-act structure. And you can think about The Wizard of Oz. Act 1 is Dorothy in Kansas dreaming of going somewhere over the rainbow. Act 2 is her arrival at Oz and the great quest that she goes on looking for a way home. And Act 3 in The Wizard of Oz begins when she unmasks the wizard, when she pulls the curtain back, creates a huge change, and then ultimately finds her way back home. Story jokes are little movies. They're little plays, and they're in a 3-act structure, just like a movie. 3 acts. Act 1. Murray goes over to Saul's house and discovers a little penguin walking back and forth. We've set the scene. We've met the players. There's Saul, there's Murray, there's a penguin. Act 1. Act 2. Murray says to Saul, "This penguin is clearly unhappy. You should take him to the zoo." And there we go. That's the quest. That's the journey. That is Murray writing this problem with this penguin. Act 3. Murray comes back the next week, and the penguin is still there. And he says, "Saul, I thought you were going to take him to the zoo." And Saul says, "I did. He loved it. Today we're going to go to a baseball game." And curtain. 3 acts. Now, this kind of joke telling exists not just Jews tell jokes like this. Although it tends to be immigrant groups. The Irish tell jokes, the Italians tell jokes, but Jews have a special relationship with
Sorry, I couldn't hear what you said.
Hang on a second, my watch decided to interrupt me. Jews have a special relationship with the story joke, and so it's worth looking historically to see if you can figure out where it comes from. And there's no authoritative research on this, but I've always had a couple of theories. So here's some old jokes, and you've heard these old jokes before. So a man goes into a doctor's office and says, "Doctor, it hurts when I go like this." And the doctor says, "Don't go like that." A man goes to the doctor's office and says, "Look at this, doctor." And the doctor says, "Oh, look at that. Have you had that before?" "Yes, I have." "Well, you got it again." Now, these are old jokes, and we recognize them as old jokes. They are actually not old jokes. These are part of a routine from a vaudeville team called Smith and Dale, whose names, by the way, were not Smith and Dale. They were Seltzer and Marx. And they were a vaudeville team, and those jokes came out of a sketch they did, which was incredibly popular, and it was called Dr. Cronkite and His Only Living Patient. And it was a series of Dr. Cronkite, and by the way, Cronkite in Yiddish means illness or sickness. So Dr. Cronkite and His Only Living Patient. And so one of the things story jokes are, is there a preservation of vaudeville? And vaudeville was very, very Jewish, especially comics in vaudeville. So when you hear a joke that's mostly dialogue and mostly people talking, there's a pretty good chance what you're hearing is an old vaudeville routine. The second possibility about why Jews love story jokes is there a shorter version of something Jews were doing in literature. So when you talk about great Irish writers, you talk about Joyce and Yeats. When you talk about great Jewish writers, you're often talking about people who wrote funny things. You're talking about Sholem Aleichem and Philip Roth. When Jews write, and since if you look at Jewish literature going back to the 1800s, 1700s, you're often looking at funny stuff. So one possibility, why do we like story jokes? It's a form that we were doing. But there's another possibility, and this is the one that I find most interesting. So I'm going to tell you a story. It is absolutely not a joke. This is in no way a joke. This is from I have the name, Rabbi will correct me, but it's Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev. Do you know this? Do you know this scholar writing in the 1700s? He is the author of one of my favorite little parables, and it is a story to teach the Jewish concept of lashon hara, of the evil tongue, of speaking bad about something. And the story goes, there was a man who went through his community slandering the rabbi, and one day he's feeling remorseful, and he goes to the rabbi and he begs for forgiveness, and he's willing to do anything. And the rabbi says to go get a feather pillow and to take it to the center of the town and cut the pillow open and let the feathers fly. And he goes to the rabbi and he says, "I've done this." And the rabbi says, "Now go and gather the feathers." And the man says, well, that's impossible. And the rabbi says, of course it is. Gossip spreads like feathers. It's impossible to call it back. Now, this is absolutely not a joke. But it's a rabbinical story from the 1700s, and it has the flavor of a zillion other rabbinical stories from the 1700s of trying to explain Jewish principles. It's structured like a joke. It's that same three-act structure. The first act, the man slanders the rabbi. The second act, the visit with the rabbi and the task. And the third act, the surprise, the end. The structure of this rabbinical story is exactly the same as the penguin joke. They have the exact same shape. And so one of the things that I personally have wondered about, because this is a connection that I've made, is the Jewish fondness for the story joke, because it matches the style of Jewish teaching, the parabolic style of Jewish teaching, the little story that illustrates something. So one possibility is it's essentially, it's in our DNA. But here's the question. If Jews are tellers of jokes and lovers of jokes, what makes a joke Jewish? Some jokes are so Jewish that only Jews can tell them and only Jews can understand them. Sometimes you literally have to speak a special Jewish language to understand them. It's a dark and rainy night. The maiden lays on the bed in her room. There's a figure at the window. The wind rattles against the window, and the window bursts open, and the figure enters, fangs bared, cape about him, bloodlust in his eyes. And the maiden reaches by the side of her bed for the cross she keeps in case this ever happens, and she holds it up to the figure, who says, "Lady, wer ist dir gar nicht helfen?" If you don't know that's Yiddish for "it's not going to help," you do know it. Sometimes a Jewish joke is Jewish because it's about Judaism. It's about the practice of Judaism. It seems Rabbi Klein had developed a taste for pork. He didn't want anyone from the congregation to see him indulge. So he took the train up to Poughkeepsie, and he went to a restaurant and he ordered a whole suckling pig. Well, it turns out Mrs. Nussbaum has a sister in Poughkeepsie, and she was walking past the restaurant, and she sees the rabbi in front of him, a whole suckling pig. And she rushes in and she says, "Rabbi, Rabbi, oh my God." And he says, "I know. I ordered a baked apple. Look how it came." But what is it at the core that makes a Jewish joke a real Yiddische Witz? It's a couple of things. Jewish humor has substance. It's about something. It's about how we live. It's about relationships and family and health and survival and life and death. And Jewish humor is often what we comedy writers call dangerous. It's dangerous because it hangs out in areas that officially aren't funny. If you sat down and said, write a list of things that aren't funny, you might start with death. But hundreds of Jewish jokes are about death. My favorite is a wonderful old joke. Abi is not long for this world, and he's lying upstairs in bed. And his wife comes up and she says, "Abi, my love, my darling, I can see you're not long for this world. Is there anything, any final request you have?" And he says, "Well, I'm laying here and I'm smelling from the kitchen. Is it your chocolate babka? It is. Could I have a piece? Tss, it's for the shiva. Jewish jokes get dangerous in other ways. They're often about the intimacies of human relationships. Muriel says to Saul, Saul, I suspect from you, you're being out at the night, you're having on me maybe an affair. Saul says, no, I would never, Muriel. She says, tell me. He says, well, to be honest, yeah. She says, well, I don't want our marriage from 25 years should end. If there's something she does for you, I'll do for you. He says, well, there's one thing. He says, what is it? She says, well, she moans. She moans? She moans. No, I'll moan. So they go upstairs and they're engaged in marital relations. And she says, now? And he says, not yet. And he says, now? Not yet. Now? Not the time. Now? Yes, now. The painter came by earlier today, what he wants to charge to paint this place. And on the top of this, your son hasn't given me a call. By the way, one of the things I love about that joke, there are a whole bunch of jokes, especially Jewish jokes, where there's a Torah, and then there's a Haftorah joke that goes with that joke, where you find the same ideas. Horowitz buys a dog, and he trains him, and he invites his friend Epstein over to see him. And Epstein enters the house, and Horowitz points to a newspaper on the door and tells the dog, fetch. And the dog climbs on the couch and wags his tail, and then the dog starts to frown and looks up at Horowitz, and he says, let me tell you, you think it's being easy being a dog, wagging my tail all the time, acting friendly to get your attention? You think that's enough, and will it kill you to introduce me maybe to a lady dog once or twice? And Epstein is stunned. He's never seen anything like it. And he says, that's unbelievable. Your dog can talk. You told him to fetch the newspaper, and here he is sitting on the couch talking like a regular person. And he says, I know. He's not fully trained. He thought I said fetch. Jewish humor is often closer to commentary than traditional jokes. And there's a category of jokes in Jewish humor that gets almost instead of a laugh at the end, it almost gets a, yeah, I know. It's the three Jewish ladies sitting talking about their sons. And then the first lady says, my son is the biggest doctor in New York. And the second lady says, oh, my son, the biggest lawyer in New York. And the third lady is quiet. And they turn to her and says, Sylvia, what does your son do? And she says, my son's a rabbi. So a rabbi? What kind of job is that for a Jewish boy? So that joke is worth taking apart because it's not a big giant punchline, but it's making social commentary, and this is a thing that you really find a lot in Jewish humor. The social commentary specifically in that joke is that culturally Jews had at that point come to value traditional career success over the earlier values of Judaism, which were scholarship. So this joke is funny and recognized by a generation because it recognizes and then comments on a cultural shift. And you have a lot of that in Jewish humor. You also, and this is one of the wonderful things about having such an established canon of characters and subjects, is you can paint Jewish humor in what we call the negative space around it. So here's a Jewish joke that comments on the nature of Jews and has no Jews in it. A Gentile mother calls her married son and invites him and his wife to their 50th anniversary the next Sunday night. And she tells what they're going to cook, and she names all the guests that are going to be there. And she really hopes that despite the short notice, her son and his wife will be able to attend. And the son says, Mom, I'd love to, but we already have other plans. And the mother says, okay. I'm sorry. It's a whole category. It's a whole category of Gentile jokes like that I love. It's the Gentile man goes into the clothing store and he tries on a suit and he says, "How much is this suit?" And the fellow says, "That suit is $2,500." And the Gentile says, "I'll take it." Those jokes are only funny because those jokes play in the negative space around the Jewish archetypes that we know. Jewish jokes are about logic and arguing often, and in this aspect, I find the Jewish jokes are most Talmudic. There's a joke that is in Fiddler on the Roof that Sholem Aleichem wrote in the original Tevye stories that actually at the time Sholem Aleichem wrote was already an old joke. And the joke, which you remember from Fiddler, is Reb Nachum the beggar comes up and he says, "Alms for the poor, alms for the poor." And the fellow says, "I'm sorry, Reb Nachum." He gives him a coin. He says, "1 kopek. Last week you gave me 2 kopecks." And he says, "Well, Reb Nachum, I had a bad week." And the beggar says, "You had a bad week. Why should I suffer?" But this is making a strange, wonderful little Talmudic argument in there. You find dozens and dozens of these trying to work out the logic of situations. Plotnik brings a package to the post office, and the postmaster says, "This package is too heavy. You have to put on more stamps." And Plotnik says, "If I put on more stamps, that'll make it lighter?" Two Jews are having tea. The first one says, "Life is like a glass of tea with sugar." The second one says, "A glass of tea with sugar? What does that mean?" "How should I know? All of a sudden I'm a philosopher?" Jewish humor, and this is very, very important, is anti-authoritarian. Jewish humor takes down authority, and it has a particular fondness for petty authority. So Jewish humor will go after the policeman on the corner and the principal of the school, the mayor of the town. Petty authority. It reserves its sharpest fangs for the absolute favorite target of petty authority, the president of the synagogue, who is the victim I counted, as best I could tell, I found 20 jokes very quickly where the president of the synagogue, my absolute favorite, is it's the high holidays and Rosh Hashanah service is about to start, and the rabbi and the cantor and the president of the synagogue are standing on the bima. And as the service is about to start, the rabbi is caught with absolute insecurity. And he looks at the congregation and he looks up and he says, "How can I lead these people in prayer? How can I conduct this service? How am I worthy to do this?" And he falls to his knees and he looks up and says, "Oh God, I'm nothing. And the cantor looks at him and he too is struck. And the cantor says, "How can I lead these people in song? How can I lift up their voices? How am I worthy of this?" And he falls to his feet and he says, I'm nothing. And the president of the synagogue says, how can I give inspirational words this year? How can I be responsible to this congregation? And he falls to his knees, and the president of the synagogue says, I'm nothing, I'm nothing. And the cantor turns to the rabbi and says, look who thinks he's nothing. Shortly after his bar mitzvah, Stephen decides he wants to become a rabbi, and his father suggests he visit the rabbi to find out what the job entails. And the rabbi is thrilled. And the rabbi says, ask me any question about the rabbinate, and I'll give you a straight answer. And the boy says, well, Rabbi, aside from a 15-minute sermon on Shabbat morning, do you do anything else all week? And the rabbi says, Stephen, with questions like that, you may not be suited for a rabbi. You should look into being the president of the synagogue. and then just to set it right, here's the joke that offers the revenge, which is the rabbi, the cantor, and the synagogue president are abducted by terrorists, and their captors are going to give them a last wish before they're executed. And the rabbi says, my last wish is to discuss something I've never been able to talk about from the pulpit, the Talmudic laws regarding the misuse of funds that were dedicated to the upkeep of the ancient temple in Jerusalem. It takes 3 or 4 hours to really explain it. And the cantor says, as for me, I've written a cantata about the forbidden foods of Passover. It runs 2.5 hours, which is why I never get to perform it. And you, says the terrorist leader to the third member of the group, my wish, says the synagogue president, is you kill me first. By the way, look how dangerous that joke is. Look how crazy dangerous that joke. You walk right past, when you listen to that joke, you get to the punchline, it's a delightful punchline, but you walk right past where these 3 men are. They're standing facing death at the hands of terrorists. That's another quality of Jewish humor. When I say that the jokes are dangerous, they take us all the way to the edge, and they talk about, this is a thing in our lives. Terrorists is a thing that could happen on Tuesday. There's a long historic tradition of this. This is I was looking for something good and old that does the same thing, that has the same irreverent quality. So this is a joke. This joke goes all the way back to Tsarist Russia, so this is Tevye time, and the joke goes like this: a Jewish tailor walks by a Tsarist police inspector in the street, and the inspector is furious that the Jew has neglected to doff his hat in the required manner. Jew, he cries out, what do you mean by this insolence? Where are you from? From Minsk, replies the Jew meekly. And what about your hat? Also from Minsk. That joke is it's 100 and some odd years old, and there's the same thing happening in that joke, which is, in that joke is the acknowledgement of the day-to-day life, of the experiences that they're having, and at the same time a path through it. Jewish humor, like the story of the post office, is sometimes the humor of the immigrant who doesn't understand. And those immigrant jokes served another purpose, like the stamps at the post office. They were educational parables. They were to teach the greenhorns how to fit into life in America. And there are a lot of jokes about trying to fit in. There's the fellow who goes to the judge, and he wants to change his name, And the judge says, and what is your name? He says, well, Judge, Your Honor, Your Lordship, my Your Honor, my name is Sean Ferguson. And the judge says, that seems odd. It seems odd because that's a fairly Irish name. And forgive me, but you appear to be a Jewish person of the Hebraic persuasion. How do you come to have this name? And he says, well, we're on the boat. We're coming by the new country. And we're heading for the Ellis Island. And my friend says, you don't want to be in America, Murray Rabinowitz. You want an American name. So I say, what's an American name? And he says, you want to be maybe Brent Lewis. He says, okay. He says, I get in the line and I'm waiting and I'm remembering and I get to the front of the line. He says, what is your name? And I say, oh, Sean Ferguson. That's about fitting in. My favorite thing about the irreverence of Jewish jokes and possibly the most Jewish thing about them is a character that shows up all the time in Jewish jokes, and that's God. And one of the things that happens when God shows up in a Jewish joke, one of two things happen. Either he doesn't get the respect that you would think that office would command. And a beautiful joke, if there was a Jewish joke Hall of Fame, is the grandmother with the little boy in Miami Beach. And you can sing along with this one if you in your heads. But she is walking with her grandson by the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach, and an enormous wave comes and washes up and washes her grandson away into the ocean. And she looks up and she says, "My God in Himmel, my grandson, the light of my life, my joy, my precious one, my daughter's only child. You've taken him from me. You've washed him into the ocean. Please, please, God, bring him back." And there's an enormous wave. And the wave deposits the boy on the beach in front of her. And she looks down and she looks up. And she says, "He had a hat." The absolute beauty of that joke is no matter how many times a rabbi tries to explain to you the relationship of the Jewish people and God, it's hard to do a better version than that joke. The other great way God shows up in Jewish jokes is as a fool. Murray, his wife has passed on. He's getting on in years, and he's sitting at home. And his friend comes over and he says, Murray, you're 70 years old. Your life isn't over. You're a young man. Live. You have money in the bank. Spend it. And Murray thinks, you know what? I'm going to do it. So he starts going to the gym and he's working out. And he gets a beautiful hairpiece. And he goes and he buys himself a smart set of clothes. And he buys a little red sports car. And he's driving around. And he's driving his little red sports car, and there's a beautiful girl on the street, and he winks at her, and she winks back, and he shrugs, and she gets in the sports car, and now he's Murray with his new hair, and his clothes, and his physique, and his sports car, and the girl, and he's driving, and a bolt of lightning hits him and strikes him dead. And he gets to heaven, and he says, I demand to see God. And they usher him in, and there's God. And God says, can I help you? And he says, how could you do this? For the first time in my life, I looked good. I felt good. I was living good. I had a girl. I had a car. And you strike me dead. How could you do that? And God says, Murray, is that you? I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you. by the way, I have to say, for having put all this together earlier today, I'm just looking at the clock, and my plan was to leave 15 minutes for questions, and I'm so proud of myself that timed out without reading through it. But to get to the core of the thing, the answer to the question, what makes a Jewish joke, is it's Jewish. And there's really not much beyond that. But anyway, that's what I dug up for you all. And if you have any things you want me to expand on, let me know, and we'll figure it out.
I don't know about you, my cheeks hurt. My cheeks hurt. Bill, thank you so much. Thank you. We have time for questions. Yes,
We do have time for some questions.
a perfect 15 minutes for questions. You can feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand, and David or I can try and catch you on the screen if you have a question for Bill. Rick.
First of all, I want to say thanks to Bill. I haven't participated in a lot of these things, but when I saw your name, I couldn't resist. You and your family are among our favorites, the Gores, and Big Bang is way up top. What have you been doing since Big Bang? What's been keeping you busy? And fill us in on.
Well, so many things. I'm getting married.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. My plan is to keep doing it until I get it right. And but years ago, by the way, I had an encounter with Mickey and Jan Rooney, because we lived in a house that had once been lived in by Mickey Rooney, and Jan was the 9th Mrs. Rooney. So I feel that I'm safe from being near the record. But I also I have a little production company we have set up with the good people over at Netflix, and we have a couple of pilots, my producing partner and I, that are moving forward, and we have one for Netflix, one for Apple Plus, an animated piece that's going to go to Hulu, and then a few more. And this was supposed to be, I was going to retire early, and I did not. So there you go. That's the answer to that. Good to see you, Rick.
Good to see you, Bill.
Marty.
Yes. This is a question that really isn't Jewish humor. It's just humor. And that is that when I watch today's stand-up comedians, these young comedians, I can't laugh at anything. And yet the audience just breaks up. The comedian could say, I'm from Minnesota, and the audience just goes wild. And then he'll say something else. And I'm just not getting it. Maybe you can explain what's going on today.
Yeah. So jokes and stand-up stuff are cultural. And here's an interesting thing that happened to me. There's Jon Stewart, who produced The Daily Show for years on Comedy Central. And he made one of the funniest jokes when he, in the first or second season, when The Daily Show won an Emmy, and he stood up and he said, they said I couldn't succeed with a writing staff that was only 80% Jewish. They said you needed 90, at least 95, but I proved them wrong. Jewish humor has been the predominant humor in the United States from the 1930s, probably till about 20 years ago. And what happened is we stopped being outsiders, and we joined society. The stand-up humor that you will find is almost always the humor of the outsider. And who are outsiders now? Well, outsiders to American culture now are immigrants from other immigrant groups, They are people who are outside what my friends would call the heteronormative experience, so people who come from the LGBTQ community and things like that. And the things that they're talking about, because stand-up humor, as I said earlier when I was talking about Alan King, stand-up humor evolved. The dominant form of stand-up humor now is observational humor. And the reason you find yourself not clicking with a particular comedian, and I don't know, who you experienced, is because you haven't made the same observations. And that's there is a cultural shift. And I have to tell you something. It's a wonderful cultural shift. One of the things that I always find very, very exciting is when I'm watching a comedian and I say, I don't get this material. Because what it tells me is that there's an area of the cultural experience that I don't know about. I've been working, one of the projects that I'm working on is based on a true life story of an Indian family, East Indian, who moved to the American South, where the parents ran a motel and the children grew up Indian in the American South in the 1980s, which is an insane experience. But I'm working with a couple of Indian writers on it. One of them is Gorinda Chadha, who's the woman who wrote and directed Bend It Like Beckham, who's a wonderful person. And when we're on our Zoom conference like this, they will start telling each other stories about Indian mothers. And they're laughing until they're crying. And it's just things Indian mothers say to each other, say to their children. And I love that I don't get any of it. I love that other cultures are having an opportunity to have a stage that was incredibly dominated by, just astonishingly dominated by a single culture. So my response to you is, you didn't get that comedian because they were sharing the experience of being a cultural outsider in some way that you didn't make a connection to. Jews are spoiled. Jews are spoiled when we watch comedy because culturally so much of it has come from our world. I was just watching the movie My Favorite Year the other night, which is one of my absolute favorite movies, and if you haven't seen it, it's worth it for the scene where Peter O'Toole, as the swashbuckling Stan Swan, goes to dinner with the Jews in Brooklyn, but it reminds you that that we've been spoiled. We've had a huge area of culture kind of to ourselves. So long-winded way of saying not all the jokes are for us anymore.
And Bill, that the flip side of that, and maybe this is for too long a thesis for a Q&A, but how does that Indian humor that the two about Indian mothers that they were talking about, how does that break through to the wider audience? How did the Jewish humor break through? We've never been a huge part of the American population.
Right, but
how did that humor become dominant when it is so referential to a culture?
Well, that humor became dominant because Jews were in show business, because Jews were excluded from other things. Jews wound up in the. I've talked about this in other talks, but television comedy, modern Jewish comedy, which you found. There are a couple of sort of little knots to look at. The people involved with Sid Caesar, and that the Sid Caesar writers' room is one of the great launching pads, because in that writers' room is Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner and Woody Allen and Mel Tolkien, who works on All in the Family, and Neil Simon and his brother Danny. And so that is actually sort of a nexus that spreads and becomes a huge amount of television comedy. And then there's a second wave that comes up through an incredibly important thing, which is Mad Magazine. So Mad Magazine is often overlooked. The importance of Mad Magazine in modern Jewish humor, but Mad Magazine in the 1960s is entirely Jewish. The staff of Mad Magazine, the editorial staff of Mad Magazine is entirely Jewish. Some of the artists aren't, but the magazine is essentially giving the rhythms of Jewish humor to teenage boys in the 60s. And so if you look at Mad Magazine from the 60s, the jokes, the rhythm of it, the shape of it, it's all very Jewish. So all of that spread out, and those were America's comedy writers. What's really interesting is, you look at something like the Gary Marshall comedies. Gary Marshall used to say one of the greatest challenges was explaining to people he was Italian, not Jewish, because he was the master of Jewish style humor. And he ran, Gary Marshall is one of the writers on The Odd Couple television series, and they continue the Neil Simon humor. So because we dominated it, it became indistinguishable from American humor. And what's really cool working on stuff where things come from other cultures is, for the first time, I'm in the position of saying that joke won't play because the basis of that joke isn't known. And where it's been said to me about a joke that's much too Jewish, and that joke won't play because people in Kansas don't know enough Yiddish to get that joke. So it's really interesting being in the position on that project of going, that's too Indian. They're not going to get it.
Interesting.
Gary?
What's the story of the alto and the tenor in the background?
Oh, I play them.
You still play
That's the story of them.
in a group?
No, but actually, I was 58 when I took up the saxophone because I was standing on the stage at Big Bang Theory, and we were talking about regrets, and I said that I regretted that I never learned to play jazz saxophone, and the broadcast standards guy, a wonderful guy named Doug Robinson, big heavyset African American fellow, looked at me and he said, "Well, you're not dead." So I said, "All right," and I went out and bought a saxophone. So it's been very enjoyable. I was going to have my 60th birthday party. I was going to play the sax with the band, but instead we decided to have COVID. So,
Darlene.
Thank you, David.
My mother, Bill. My mother.
Delighted to hear that you're going to be continuing in production end of things. And I'm wondering if you have a reaction to some of the comment that I've been seeing about media, that it needs to more recognize with more examples the portion of the population that is, in TJVillage terms, mature.
Oh, okay. Well, this is a very interesting thing, especially if you talk about television. So one of the things, and I'll tell you how the problem came to be, and then I'll tell you what's happening with it. In the late 1960s, I think, there was a piece of research done, and it's a single piece of research that suggested that people over 49 years old, people beyond 49, were unlikely to change purchasing preferences. So the essential, the upshot of the report is I'm 64 years old, I'm a Pepsodent man, and I'm going to be a Pepsodent man till I die. This study was never duplicated, but it took hold of the advertising community. And their feeling is that if we're advertising outside the 18 to 49 group, we're wasting our money, because this piece of research says over 49 isn't there. I can't get to them. So the result is that advertisers said to networks, we will pay more money for 18 to 49 year eyeballs. So the networks then turn to content creators and say, please give me something that's going to appeal to 18 to 49 year olds. And this never changed. And it's one of the most bizarre things that a whole industry made a decision based on essentially a single study. What's happened now, because we live at a time, there has never been this amount of television being produced. Never. You used to actually be able to look at the newspaper, and there were about 100 television shows that were being made. They used to list them in order of ratings. There were 100 shows. You couldn't even figure out how many shows are being made. When I sat with the Netflix people and they showed me what their slate of shows is, I hadn't heard of most of them. I would say I haven't heard of 80% of them. So we live in a time of what's called narrowcasting, where shows can find particular niches. Some shows, and one of them, for example, is Netflix's The Crown, which is the story of the British royal family. That show plays to a predominantly senior audience. And Netflix finds it great success. So Netflix and the streamers don't have the same bigotry that the broadcast networks did, because they're not driven by the advertiser model, they're driven by the subscription model. So the way a streamer works is they work like a dress shop, which is to make sure that whenever you log on, there's something new and interesting that catches your eye that keeps you paying the monthly fee. So you actually do see, I think, a lot of programming that plays to a wider variety of ages and interests when you look at streaming television. But television is it's a big ocean liner. It turns very, very slowly. I think, one of the other things that's happened, so one of the streamers I just watched, does anyone see a piece called The Dig? I think is the name of it. I'm going to say it was Hulu, maybe. I can't remember which streamer it was. It might have been Hulu.
I thought it was Netflix.
It might have been Netflix. But anyway, this is to me, it's showing that the streamers are saving, to a certain extent, movies, because that's what we might have called 20 years ago an art house movie. And the other name for an art house movie was movies young people don't like. But there used to be a market for them. And in the movie theater exhibition business has changed, because the discovery of the action movie and the superhero movie and the profitability of that model has crowded the art house movie out of those places. But I actually think, the long way around to your answer is I think that there is so much more for a wider audience, because the streamer model doesn't lean into that old 18 to 49 prejudice that they can absolutely, and there is, if you look at the subscriber base, it skews older, on a lot of streamers. So I think I think the marketplace will bring more of that to bear. There's a long answer to that.
I think we probably have time for one or two more. Let's see. Do I see a hand? Darlene, do you have a follow-up?
I do. It is to plug our meeting on Monday at 2:00 for those in the group who are readers and want to read books of interest to mature audiences.
Thank you. Any other questions? I'm scrolling through. I'm sorry if I miss you. Just go ahead and unmute yourself. You have that capability.
Bill?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. I was doing research because I belong to another organization where I found out that cable subscribers is decreasing and decreasing and decreasing. So that goes with your streaming. So people are just not.
Right. So the industry nickname for that phenomenon is cord cutting. And what people are, and we're in a huge transition period. You know, you had a choice, and the choice was the cable company that served your area. So cable companies are semi-monopolies in areas, right? A city has two, but they divide up the city. So you have the cable company that comes to your house. And what people have discovered is that the streamers let people, you can now order a la carte, right? You can say, I think I would like one movie service, and I would like the local channels. You can put together using streamers, you're essentially your own lineup of stuff that you like. And the problem right now is it's cumbersome to use. And I find, even I'm a person who works in entertainment, and I will sit down with my fiance who works in entertainment. She's the showrunner of Supergirl on the CW, and we will be flummoxed. How do we find something to watch? Where do we go? You look here and you look at this one, and then you're going, what was the show somebody was telling us about the lady, and where is that? And so right now the cord cutting phenomenon, I think, is leading to some real confusion, but it'll settle out at some point. People will, somebody will figure out a way to do it. But I think it's a really interesting time. As I said, there's never been in the history of the entertainment business, there's never been more stuff in production than there is right now. And to a great extent, the problem is finding it. Me, I wind up just watching Rockford Files reruns because they're great.
Bill, I also want to thank you. I enjoyed all of the jokes.
Oh, good. By the way, I have to tell you that so in order to get here for 4:00, and I said to Rabbi that I have to pick up my son because he's doing in-person school, so we had to run back and all of that, and I made it here exactly at 4:00. But as I'm driving back, my father keeps calling and saying, "Did you put this joke in?" And so for the half hour that I'm driving here, my dad is saying, well, what about, you can't leave this one out. So, I said, Dad, I'm in the car, and then I'm going to be on the Zoom. I'm not putting any more jokes.
That's a Jewish parent joke in itself.
I will say, you know what? I'm going to tell one more joke, because I'll tell one more joke because it's not a joke. It's how I explained my mother. I don't think my mother did tune in. I'm just going to check before. Nope, she's not there. Okay, I'll tell you. So this is a true story, but it sure sounds like a joke. My mother is sitting at my sister's house, and my sister has a friend over, and the friend looks at my mother's shoes, and she says, Susan, oh my God, Susan, plain, simple, black pumps. I have been looking everywhere for plain, simple, black pumps. I'm desperate for plain, simple black pumps. Where did you get those? And my mother said, well, by 10 Mile and Greenfield where Dexter Davison Market is? Uh-huh. And then Kitty Corner across from that is a little strip mall? Uh-huh. And if you go in the parking lot, there's the front section of the strip mall with most of the stores. But if you drive around the side, there's a second section with a little bit of stores over there. Uh-huh. And there's the yogurt place, right? And then there's the dry cleaner. Uh-huh. And then there's a locksmith. They make locks. Uh-huh. That used to be a shoe store. Not only do we tell Jewish jokes, we live inside Jewish jokes. So there you go.
That's very funny. I see that Carol is raising her hand, so I'm going to turn it to Carol for a moment, and then we'll wrap up. Carol, go ahead.
My question has to do with how has all the requirements of observing COVID-19 sorts of things and difficulty in getting into production, especially in Canada, affected what you're doing?
It's been terrible. It's very frustrating. I mean, I'm in a delightful stage called development, which means most of what I'm doing is writing. And I have found writing and working with other writers over the computer is excruciating. And I talk to other writers, and our output, we talk about it being our output is a third, a quarter what it usually is in page count and what we're able to do. And then I hear, because my fiance's show is produced in Vancouver, and the difficulty I hear, among other things, is she can't go to the set. She can't fly to Vancouver to the set, because when you go to Canada, there's a mandatory 14-day quarantine. And then there are problems on the set. The big problem on the set was the lady who had the 6-foot stick to keep everybody 6 feet apart was hitting people with their COVID stick. And that it was a big crisis that the nurse can't hit people with the COVID stick.
Oh my God.
But it's been super difficult. It's starting to feel on the production side like we're coming out of it. There are a lot of sets where you have a majority of people at this point vaccinated, and so things are going better. But on the other hand, what's been amazing is the number of people who have been able to stay working and stay drawing a salary, and that's been a blessing. I have friends in New York on Broadway, and that's what a crisis that's been. So
well, to go with that, my boyfriend is a producer. His show is The Boys.
Okay.
But since all this started, he has more meetings than ever, because you're not driving anywhere. You're doing your Zooms from home, and I listen to all this stuff, and it's just amazing.
There is a lot more of that's happening, but I personally hate all of it. So there, as I've said, when COVID is over, I am downloading the Zoom app off the computer onto a flash drive, and then I'm taking the flash drive out in the backyard and burning it. So
Okay. Sounds like a plan.
Yeah, really. Well, thank you, Bill. I mean, through all of this COVID and this year, laughter surely is one of the best medicines, and you provided us with that for an hour. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
This was really, really wonderful. I just briefly want to mention, Darlene did mention our first TJVillage Book Mavens Book Club organizational meeting, which is this Monday, the 26th at 2 p.m. So watch for that link. And then I also just wanted to mention an upcoming Brotherhood event. The Brotherhood Tasting Series resumes on May 27th with our summer wine celebration. Sounds like a lot of fun. A virtual and interactive wine tasting led by a certified wine expert. So we'll sample wines from 3 boutique wineries in Sonoma and Santa Ynez, and info can be found on the Temple Judea website. So please join us for all of those fun events to stay connected virtually while we're still in this COVID world. But thank you, Bill.
Yeah. Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye,
Thanks,
Bill.
Bill.
Bye.
Rabbi, is this been videotaped?
Yes, this was recorded for anyone who would like. It'll be uploaded